Hello and welcome to the new and improved rebranded TWG. That's right, the wrestling group is being rebranded to TWG. And today we're going to start our new series of looking at all things to do with AEW. And we're going to start concentrating on such things like fantasy booking, talking about stuff that's going on currently in AEW, looking at stuff that's happened previously in AEW. But we're going to do a whole series based on AEW because mainly that's what I watch, so it makes sense for me to give you the content that I watch rather than trying to report on other companies that I don't watch, like WWE. I don't really watch WWE anymore, I haven't for a while, so I'm going to stay mainly on AEW. Obviously I watch other companies like New Japan, like House of Glory, MLW, but it's primarily this series is just going to be based on AEW, and where better to kick off than to look at the main event of AEW Redemption. So for a long time, me, and pretty sure most of you, would have thought that Kenny Omega would have been going for the AEW World Heavyweight Championship at AEW Redemption, considering it's being held in Canada. So we were all thinking that, that was going to be where the match was going to be. Kenny Omega's going to win it and then go on to face Will Ospreay all in London to give us Omega vs Ospreay 3. But there's been a slight change of plans, as last night on Dynamite we seen the matches actually being booked for next week on Beach Break. So that leaves many questions. One, why did it get moved? So I've had a look online and no one seems to actually have an official reason for why the match was brought forward, and it's going to be on TV instead of pay-per-view. And of course, what happens? So is Kenny Omega going to become the new AEW World Champion, then go into Canada as champion? And if so, who's he defending it against? Or is there going to be some shenanigans? So we've seen a lot of people online are talking maybe Hangman Page comes back, causes an interference or a disruption in the match, and then the match gets thrown out and it's then moved to the pay-per-view, the main event. Could we see, Will Ospreay get involved somehow? Even the Death Riders get involved somehow? There's a couple of different angles that are being worked at the moment. And it's just leaving everyone a bit up in the air as to what's going on. But you know what? That's how I like my wrestling. I hate it when it's predictable. I can't stand it when it's on the nose, so predictable. Don't get me wrong. Some matches, when you look at them, it doesn't matter the company. You look at that and go, this person's going to win. That's fine. You can't always be unpredictable, but not everything needs to be set in stone predictable. I can predict a WWE pay-per-view predictions. I can do that without even watching the current product because I know who they're going to put over. But in AEW right now, we've got this, everyone's up in arms going, we thought this was going to be the main event at AEW Redemption, but instead we're getting it at Beach Break. So what's the deal? So to me, in my mind, I was looking at it and I thought, could they do it where there is a situation that there's interference or there's something that happens where basically the match doesn't get go ahead and then it gets shown at the pay-per-view instead? And I can't see that being the case for the simple fact is it's not really a line that AEW like to pull on. Normally when they advertise a match, they give you the match and they give you it full and proper. I'd be surprised if they did that. Obviously there's another one for if Kenny Omega wins the AEW World Champion, then he's going to be going to Wembley to defend it against Will Ospreay. But obviously if he doesn't, now he can never then challenge for the AEW World Championship. Now this is why people are thinking maybe Hangman Page becomes involved. But see, my thing to that is if Hangman Page gets involved, why would Hangman get involved and cost Kenny his shot? It makes no sense. Surely he'd want to try and cost MJF the belt, but if they're doing that and that's why it's on at Beach Break, why couldn't they just do that at the pay-per-view? So I don't think it's that either. I think Kenny Omega's going to win the belt. For whatever reason they decide to move forward. But I think Kenny's going to win the belt next week on AEW Beach Break. And then we're going to have Kenny going into Canada at Redemption. He's going into, it's Quebec, isn't it? Montreal. As the AEW World Champion. So that then brings the question to who's he going to then defend it against, because the storylines that he has mainly going is Ospreay, which is obviously going to be at Wembley, and then obviously MJF, which unless they then do a rematch, but are you going to do a main event of a Dynamite and then 2 weeks later do the main event of a pay-per-view? don't know whether they're going to do that. I know they did it obviously not too long ago with Darby Allin and MJF. You know, Darby held it for like 4 or 5 weeks, and then it went from like first Dynamite after the pay-per-view, held it, defended it every week, and then lost it at the pay-per-view. I don't know if we're going to do that again, where you'd have the same match, because it would literally be about 2 weeks later. So my thought is the only viable challenge that I can think of, unless literally you pluck out a random Canadian, because there's so many Canadians on the roster, and they just go, you deserve a title shot because it's 2 Canadians. So obviously you've got like Kyle O'Reilly, Speedball Mike Bailey, Adam Copeland, Christian Cage, you know, all these Canadians that all of a sudden become number 1 contenders because they're Canadian. But I don't think it's that. I think, I might be the only one here, but I think Kenny Omega wins the belt, goes in as champion, and the main event of AEW Redemption is going to be Kenny Omega defending the AEW World Heavyweight Championship against Jon Moxley. Because the whole storyline with Will Ospreay and the Death Riders, you know, he's officially joined. We've seen it last night. He had the little Death Riders symbol on his tights. You know, they team together, Mox and Ospreay. A really impressive team, by the way. And every time we've seen them backstage, we've seen Ospreay and Omega backstage, we've also seen Jon Moxley. Each and every time it's been the 3 of them. So for me, maybe Mox gets that shot, maybe Moxley versus Kenny Omega for the AEW World Championship. Now, I know it's a few years ago, but if I remember right, wasn't Kenny Omega the one that defeated Jon Moxley for the championship? So obviously Jon Moxley was the 2nd AEW World Champion. He beat Chris Jericho. Pretty sure Kenny Omega was the 3rd, wasn't he? And Kenny Omega beat Jon Moxley for the World Championship. So maybe, just maybe, Mox wants to get a bit of revenge. And like I say, you know, it's that tying in with the storyline. You're consistently seeing him, you know, Omega's constantly telling Will Ospreay, watch out for him, he's bad news, he's a bad guy, you know. And Ospreay's like, you know, I'm not stupid, but, you know, he's doing me well at the minute, he's doing me favours. You know, this storyline's got to go somewhere down the line, somewhere, hasn't it? It's got to be coming to a head with Mox and Ospreay at some point. And then how do we get to that? So is Ospreay going to go to Wembley as Death Rider? You know, could Ospreay win the world title and then Jon Moxley turns on him? Or could that come to a head beforehand, where we have Mox and Ospreay going head to head beforehand? See, my original idea was it was going to be, like I say, MJF versus Kenny Omega for the AEW World Championship, and then on the same card at Redemption, I thought we were going to get Mox versus Ospreay in some capacity, maybe doing what he did with Darby, and he's like, you put your world title opportunity on the line for the shot, you know what I mean? Like he did with Darby, and he took Darby's chance and went and beat Danielson for the title, didn't he, at Wrestle Dream 2 years ago. So, you know, I was thinking maybe we get something like that, but obviously now this is all changing. In my mind, like obviously none of this was actually planned. This is just what I think. You know, Brian Alvarez and Dave Meltzer have both said that it was supposed to be the main event at Redemption. They've brought it forward, but there's no reason why. So I'm going to say I think the main event of AEW Redemption is going to be AEW World Heavyweight Champion Kenny Omega defending the championship against the Death Rider leader, Jon Moxley. So that is my prediction. So let me know your predictions in the comments down below. Who do you think will be in the main event of AEW Redemption? Do you think Kenny Omega is going to win the championship next week at Beach Break? Do you think there's going to be maybe some shenanigans? Are we going to get a Hangman Adam Page return? Will it be a rematch at the pay-per-view? Will Kenny Omega be walking in as champ or walking out as champ? And who will be in the main event? That's the main thing. Let me know in the comment section down below, and of course if you haven't already, please do hit that subscribe button now. Like I say, this is the first video of the rebrand from the wrestling group to TWG. I'll have new merchandise coming soon.